What if I told you that staring at your phone at like 11 o'clock at night, just scrolling mindlessly until your eyes literally burn, isn't actually a sign that you have zero self-control?
Right. It's actually the opposite of what most people think.
Exactly. What if instead it's a highly evolved survival mechanism designed by your brain to block out a deeply ingrained, completely terrifying childhood fear?
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking you on a journey through this fascinating translated document that explores the surprisingly brutal psychology of our own self-doubt.
It really is brutal when you get down to it.
It is. And if you've ever felt like you're constantly failing or just running this endless race where the finish line keeps moving on you, we're going to unpack the underlying mental architecture causing that exhaustion. And of course, we'll look at the clinical steps you can actually take to dismantle it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note right up front, we are moving entirely past the usual self-help cliches here. The source material we're analyzing today breaks down the actual neurological and psychological realities of childhood conditioning, which is mind-blowing.
It really is. It looks at the bizarre ways our adult brains misallocate energy and the cognitive hacks researchers use to untangle all of it. It offers a very sharp, uncompromising look at why what you probably accept as your normal baseline is actually a state of chronic, high-level distress.
I mean, I think a lot of us don't even realize we're in distress until our bodies literally force us to stop. I catch myself doing this all the time, and the source describes it so perfectly. You'll read an email from a colleague that says something entirely neutral, like, let's review this tomorrow.
Oh, the dreaded neutral email.
Right. And instead of taking it at face value, your brain immediately launches a full-blown forensic investigation. You analyze the lack of an exclamation point. You start wondering if review is corporate code for a reprimand. And suddenly your heart rate is elevated over a completely mundane interaction.
Well, your brain is essentially running a threat detection algorithm on overdrive in that moment. A tiny, insignificant variable is introduced into your environment, and it triggers a massive cognitive distortion.
Because it feels real. It feels like an actual emergency.
Exactly. You aren't just overthinking. Your amygdala, the brain's fear center, is literally processing a missing exclamation point with the same biological alarm bells it would use to signal a physical predator.
Wow.
Yeah. It dumps cortisol and adrenaline straight into your bloodstream, creating an immediate, visceral, physiological response to an entirely fabricated threat.
Which explains the absolute paralysis that hits when you try to, start a new project or take a risk. You want instant results. You want to be brilliant right out of the gate.
Of course.
But the second you encounter friction, or the moment the project doesn't match that flawless vision in your head, the fear of doing it imperfectly becomes so overwhelming that you just stop.
You freeze up.
You freeze. You end up trapped in that classic procrastination loop, just sitting in a holding pattern of anxiety until the deadline is hours away, which forces you into a blind panic just to get the work done. And then we wonder why we are so depleted all the time.
And when you are stuck in that holding pattern, when the anxiety is peaking, but you physically cannot bring yourself to act, the instinct isn't to fix the root problem.
No, not at all.
The instinct is to sedate the panic, which brings us back to your initial point about the phone.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sedation method is fascinating. The source points out that when we hit that wall of anxiety, we instinctively reach for our screens. But it's not merely because social media algorithms are addictive.
Right, there's a deeper function there.
Yeah, I like to think of it as cognitive white noise. You are intentionally flooding your brain's working memory with thousands of tiny, completely useless pieces of data. A 30-second comedy sketch, a political headline, a video of someone cooking a meal you will literally never eat.
You're filling up the buffer.
Exactly. You fill up your mental RAM so there's physically no processing power left to focus on the dread you're feeling about your actual life.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize the mechanism. You are executing a denial of service attack on your own nervous system. You overload the circuits so the anxiety just cannot compute.
It's brilliant, but terrible.
Right, because the fatal flaw in that strategy is that it requires constant input. The very second the screen goes dark, the RAM clears out. Every single reality, you're avoiding every deadline, every awkward interaction, it all rushes back into your consciousness. And usually with compounded interest.
Oh, always with interest.
The silence becomes the enemy, because the silence is when the inner critic starts talking again.
And it happens even when there is no crisis. I found the source's observation on this incredibly validating. Like when life is actually stable, when you've had a good week and there are no immediate fires to put out, there's this bizarre, creeping unease.
The waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yes, you just sit there feeling physically tense. You cannot enjoy the peace because your brain is convinced it's a trap.
This raises an important question. If your logical adult brain knows that an email is just an email and a quiet Tuesday is just a quiet Tuesday, why does the emotional center react as if you are a child about to face severe punishment?
Why does it do that?
Well, the source argues that to understand the symptom, the scrolling, the perfectionism, the exhaustion, we have to look backward at the foundational architecture of your psyche.
We have to look at childhood. The idea here is that the tightening in your chest isn't a reaction to your current reality at all. It's a ghost. It is a leftover survival mechanism from an environment where mistakes were simply not tolerated.
Evolutionary biology plays a huge part in how this develops. For a human child, inclusion in the family unit or the tribe is quite literally a matter of life and death. You depend entirely on caregivers for physical survival.
You can't fend for yourself.
Exactly. So if you grow up in an environment where caregivers are highly critical or where emotional warmth is withdrawn the second you are anything less than perfect, your highly neuroplastic brain wires a very specific permanent equation. It learns that imperfection equals rejection, and rejection equates to death.
Wow.
Boom.
So a bad grade on a math test doesn't just mean, oh, I need to study fractions next time. To a young brain, it translates to a catastrophic threat. It means, I am fundamentally flawed and I will be abandoned.
It's absolute terror.
And the chilling point the source makes is that you carry that foundational belief straight into adulthood. The core operating system becomes, only perfection is safe.
You essentially absorb the critical caregiver and install them as permanent software in your own mind. You become your own merciless supervisor.
Even if your actual boss is great.
Right. The external environment around you might have completely changed. You might live in a safe home. You might work at a highly supportive company with colleagues who really value you. But your nervous system hasn't downloaded the update.
It's running on old code.
It is still operating on the original threat detection software from 20 years ago. So when you make a minor mistake on a spreadsheet, your adult intellect knows it's easily fixable, but your emotional brain registers it as a threat to your biological survival.
To understand the mechanics of how this outdated software actually runs our daily lives, the source pulls from classic psychoanalysis, specifically Sigmund Freud. But they frame it in a way that feels incredibly applicable to modern burnout. They focus on the friction between the superego and the id.
Which is so interesting because most people treat those terms as abstract philosophical concepts. But they represent very real, competing neurobiological drives. The id represents our baseline biological drive for homeostasis. It seeks comfort, rest, autonomy, and immediate gratification.
It just wants to chill.
It operates entirely devoid of social context or future planning, yes.
It's the part of you that just wants to lie on the couch, eat whatever you want, and do absolutely nothing without feeling an ounce of guilt.
Precisely. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have the superego. The superego is the evolutionary adaptation for tribal inclusion. It is the internalized voice of societal rules, parental expectations, and moral imperatives.
The inner boss.
It is the mechanism that screams at you to be the flawless employee, the perfect friend, the ideal citizen who never rests, because historically, being the perfect tribe member kept you from being exiled.
And when these two forces collide, the source introduces this brilliant metaphor. They call it psychological torque. Imagine holding a thick, heavy rubber band in your hands. Your superego grabs one end and twists it violently towards perfect, flawless obedience and productivity.
Right.
And your id grabs the other end and twists it in the complete opposite direction, demanding rest and rebelling against those impossible standards.
Why?
You are twisting and twisting, generating this immense internal friction.
What's fascinating here is the locus of control in that metaphor. The torque, that twisting motion, isn't being applied by your boss or the economy or your family. You are the one holding both ends of the rubber band.
It's all an inside job.
You are simultaneously the authoritarian dictator and the rebellious prisoner. The external world might be completely quiet, but inside, you are violently twisting that rubber band, creating a catastrophic level of tension entirely on your own.
And what happens to a rubber band when you twist it beyond its physical capacity? It snaps. That snap is the burnout. It is the sudden panic attack in the grocery store aisle. It is the moment your cognitive load becomes so incredibly heavy that your executive function just entirely shuts down.
System crashes.
Yeah, you feel like you're under attack from the world, but you're actually just collateral damage in your own internal war.
And the tragic irony of this internal war is how we project it outward onto the rest of society. Because we are subjecting ourselves to this excruciating level of scrutiny, we naturally assume that everyone else is doing the exact same thing to us.
Which leads us to the spotlight effect. It's a recognized cognitive bias, the intense terror that everyone is watching your every move, evaluating your performance, and silently judging you for falling behind.
It's a heavy burden.
It makes you run faster and faster on the treadmill of life, terrified that slowing down for even a second will expose you as an imposter.
It is a profound projection of the superego. You assume the external world is as unforgiving and hyper-observant as your internal dialogue. But the source provides a necessary, almost brutal reality check to dismantle this bias.
So what does this all mean for us? It means, quite frankly, that nobody cares. Those moments you think are deeply humiliating or monumental failures, the time you stumbled over your words in a meeting, or the email you sent with a typo in the subject line.
The ones that keep you up at night.
Yeah, you might lie awake at 3 a.m. agonizing over it, but to everyone else it didn't even register. It is entirely forgettable.
Human beings simply do not have the cognitive bandwidth to obsess over the minor social infractions of their peers. Everyone else is too busy managing their own psychological torque, their own inner critic, to care about your typos.
We're all self-obsessed.
We are all the main characters in our own internal dramas, which means we are essentially background extras to everyone else.
That is simultaneously insulting to the ego and the most liberating thing I have ever heard. But intellectually knowing that nobody is watching doesn't automatically stop the amygdala from firing when we make a mistake. How do we actually untwist the rubber band on a neurological level?
Right. Theory isn't enough.
Exactly. The source doesn't just leave us with a theory. It outlines a very pragmatic 3-step approach to rewiring the brain.
It requires direct behavioral intervention to rewrite those deeply entrenched neural pathways. Step 1 is what the text calls embracing the mess. It asks you to start introducing small, deliberate errors into your daily routine.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because my immediate reaction to that instruction is sheer panic. If my core operating system believes that only perfection keeps me from being exiled, making deliberate mistakes sounds like a recipe for career sabotage.
It sounds dangerous.
Very. If I start firing off emails filled with typos to an important client, or if I intentionally mess up a financial report, I am going to lose my job. How do we separate a safe mistake from a genuinely destructive one?
That is the crucial distinction you have to make. The source is absolutely not advocating for negligence in high-stakes environments. We are talking about micro doses of imperfection in areas with zero real-world consequences.
Like what?
Leaving a coffee cup on your desk instead of washing it immediately. Sending a casual text message to a close friend without proofreading it 3 times. You are creating controlled, low-stakes experiments.
You are basically testing the hypothesis that the world won't end.
You are forcing the emotional brain to gather new empirical data. When you send that unedited text and your friend replies normally without disowning you, your brain registers a massive contradiction. It expected catastrophe, but it experienced safety.
It's reprogramming itself.
Over time, these microdoses of imperfection degrade the old childhood conditioning. Every safe mistake tells your nervous system, I am still worthy, and I'm still secure, even when I am flawed.
It is a total paradox. To cure the fear of failure, you literally have to prescribe yourself microdoses of failure, which acts as the perfect bridge to step 2, exposure therapy. Anxiety's primary defense mechanism is avoidance. If a social event makes you nervous, you cancel. You avoid the discomfort, which feels like a massive relief in the short term.
But clinically, avoidance is the fertilizer for anxiety. When you run away from a perceived threat, you validate the brain's false alarm. You confirm to your amygdala that the party was, in fact, incredibly dangerous.
So it gets worse next time.
The fear metastasizes in the dark. The only effective countermeasure is systemic desensitization or exposure.
You have to walk into the awkwardness. If speaking up in meetings causes a spike in your heart rate, your task is to force yourself to ask one minor question. You don't have to deliver a flawless keynote speech. You just have to withstand the discomfort of being perceived.
Just a little bit at a time.
Right. And the research promise here is that your capacity to handle that discomfort is significantly higher than your inner critic predicts. You don't build resilience by hiding in a sanitized bubble. You build it by encountering the friction, surviving it, and teaching your nervous system that discomfort does not equal destruction.
This leads directly into how we manage our overall cognitive load on a daily basis. We only have a finite amount of processing power. The source's third and final step addresses the macro-level drain on our energy, the exhausting habit of trying to control variables that are fundamentally beyond our influence.
This is the black hole where so much of our anxiety lives. I could spend 4 hours obsessing over how my boss is going to react to a proposal, or panicking about what the economy will look like in 6 months, or analyzing how someone misinterpreted my tone in a conversation.
It feels productive.
It feels like productive problem solving, yeah. Like I am protecting myself by thinking about it from every angle.
But you are burning premium fuel for zero forward momentum. Worrying feels like a protective talisman, but you are pouring all of your limited energy into factors you cannot manually adjust. The anxiety thrives on these hypothetical futures. Step 3 requires a radical contraction of your focus. You must draw a harsh, pragmatic boundary between what you can manipulate and what you cannot.
You cannot control your boss's mood. You cannot control the stock market. You can only control the quality of the work on your desk right now. So the strategy is to radically shift all of that scattered, panicked energy back to what is actually in your hands. You focus on the immediate present and you take just one small step forward. You don't need to solve the 10-year plan. You just need to do the next right thing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire framework this source presents is ultimately about an energy audit. The exhaustion you feel at the end of a seemingly normal day at a desk job isn't a sign of weakness or a personal failing.
It's not because you're lazy.
No, it is a sign of massive exertion. You are deploying world-class levels of strength, intelligence, and focus, but you are aiming it entirely inward, twisting that psychological rubber band tighter and tighter. You are fighting yourself.
We are treating our own authentic selves as an enemy that needs to be constantly subdued and managed. But once you realize the threat isn't real, once you accept that the spotlight isn't tracking your every move, that minor mistakes won't result in your exile, and that the hypothetical future is entirely out of your hands, you can finally start fighting.
You learn to let go of the ends of the rubber band, the tension dissipates, and you shift your baseline from chronic distress to actual equilibrium.
Let's just pull all of this together for a moment. We started this deep dive by looking at the deceptive nature of modern exhaustion. How staring at a screen until our eyes hurt isn't a lack of discipline, but a desperate, cognitive white noise strategy to silence a frightened inner child.
And we trace that fear back to its evolutionary roots, exploring how the developing brain equates imperfection with tribal rejection. We examined the resulting clash between the perfection-demanding superego and the rest-seeking id, and the immense psychological torque that battle generates.
And most importantly, we broke down the source's practical blueprint for overriding that outdated survival software. We looked at the necessity of gathering new data through deliberate, safe micro-mistakes. We discussed stepping into the discomfort through exposure therapy to prove our own resilience, and we highlighted the importance of brutally auditing our energy to focus only on the immediate, tangible actions we can actually control.
It is a comprehensive strategy for dismantling the internal dictator and reclaiming your cognitive bandwidth.
So I want to say this directly to you listening right now. Consider this your permission to stop running the threat detection algorithm. You do not have to be perfect to be safe. The people around you are not keeping a ledger of your minor embarrassments. They are entirely consumed by their own internal torque. Your mistakes are just tiny, forgettable blips. You are allowed to let the rubber band go slack.
And when you finally stop using all of your strength to twist that rubber band, the sheer volume of mental clarity that becomes available to you is staggering.
Which leaves me with one final thought for you to chew on today. Think about the astronomical amount of mental calories you have burned over the last decade just managing that internal friction. Think about the brilliance and focus you have wasted just keeping the cognitive shield up and playing defense against a phantom supervisor that doesn't exist. If you genuinely practice these steps, if you expose yourself to the discomfort and finally retrain your brain to be okay with the mess, what incredible, risky, audacious dream could you finally pour all that newly freed up energy into?